Welcome to the Taking a Breath podcast with Parker Mays.
Welcome back, everybody, to another episode of the Taking a Breath podcast. I'm excited today to have a conversation about education and development with Dr. Emily Smith, who I met through one of my leadership courses at NC State. She has her Ph.D. in Lifespan Developmental Psychology with an emphasis in statistical analysis. She's been with the Center for Family and Community Engagement here in Raleigh for over 3 years now, and broadly, her program of research includes examining prevalent stressors experienced by youth and adults, identifying maladaptive environments, systems, and investigating subsequent behavioral and developmental outcomes. And so it's exciting because a lot of this conversation that I've been having with people around development of youth, teens, college students, talking about transitions that are happening in our lives. Dr. Smith is really someone who spent a lot of time in researching and in this area. So Dr. Smith, thank you so much for being on today. Would love for you to share a little bit more about yourself, and then excited to jump into our conversation.
Yeah, so I am recently out of my doctoral program and just completely dived into the research world. And I'm loving every second of it. Never thought this is exactly what I would be doing. Completely took a left-hand turn from what I thought I'd be doing at this point in my life, but such is the way, and we just adapt.
100%. So what sparked that initial interest in, this idea of lifespan development psychology, and what made you want to pursue the PhD and go that extra mile in the education of that field?
Of course. So my answer to that question, some may relate with, and others might be, I don't want to say mad about, but like I said, it's a little non-traditional. My motivation to pursue my PhD was actually somewhat rooted in a level of desperation and a hard realization that, we live in a world that's just saturated with credentials. And I'm sure a lot of young professionals can relate to the struggle of trying to gain experience. But a lot of, the entry-level positions that are open to individuals with bachelor's degrees are taken up by people with master's degrees looking to gain entry-level experience for the positions that they're qualified for. So coming out of my bachelor's degree with, a degree in psychology, 4.0 GPA, internship, all the good stuff, all the things that you're supposed to do to land a good job got me nowhere. I think when I got out, I applied to like 200 jobs. And got, it was an insane amount. So desperation level, very high there.
Wow.
I got, like 4 or 5 interviews for like front desk positions, office positions, nothing that I actually wanted to do. So that level of desperation kind of hit, and I made a decision to very late in the application season to just send out a ton of applications to any degree, higher degree program in the area, and just, see where that went. And I got into the Lifespan Development program at NC State. It was a stroke of luck. My advisor was amazing. And I said, okay, this is, I guess, what I'm going to do with my life now. And I'm lucky enough to love what I do now. I really am. But I struggled. I really struggled. And unfortunately, some people spend their entire undergraduate career just working towards getting into a higher degree program, getting into a master's, getting into a PhD program that's really competitive. And that was one of the reasons why I felt, kind of bad about just landing a spot in a PhD program, was because so many other people had been planning and working towards this for so long.
Right.
And they might not have gotten it. So I guess like my message to all the young people out there is it's okay to not have a plan, but be able to adapt and to adjust and be creative. Be creative with your approach to success.
That's so good. And that idea of being adaptable, being able to shift your plans, like that's something we're seeing so consistently in the kind of skills for success area, because that's been, I mean, we've all seen it over the past year, but just in general, that idea for young people especially, it's so important. I'm curious, you mentioned there, we see young people, doing more and they're trying to, check all the boxes. Do you feel like, are you seeing that side where, students are really trying and making the effort to do as much as they can? Because I know, and I hear this of, the younger generation being this kind of like known for being either like lazier or like not doing as much. So I was just curious, from your experience, are you seeing students, trying to make that next level effort to really check all the boxes versus kind of the reputation of students right now?
Yes and no. I think the individuals who I'm seeing check all of those boxes and quite frankly work themselves into the ground,
right,
are the ones who have their eye on that program. They have assessed where they want to be in life, and that assessment has yielded a determination that they need to do X, Y, and Z to get there. And that's really what they want, and they're willing to apply themselves to do that. However, if you don't want to get into that very competitive, pre-med, law, research degree or program, then you might not have to check all those boxes X, Y, and Z. And that's perfectly fine as well. But as with most communities, we tend to have such a binary vision of who people are. We tend to negate this spectrum perspective,
right,
and we see the hardest working and then we see the laziest.
right.
And we tend to group people into those extremes. And that's just not the case. And we do that across a number of domains, and we really have to get out of that mindset of just categorizing people into these two extremes. It's very detrimental to our perception of others and the way we approach certain situations and the way we identify ourselves, because we throw ourselves into these extreme categories as well.
Right.
If we're not in one, then we're in the other, and it just doesn't make sense. It really doesn't. So yes, unfortunately, my answer would be it depends.
No, and I agree. It's a great point that it's not either or. And like so many decisions that we make, or categories that we want to put ourselves into, it's either this or this. And like all of the communication and the openness and the willingness to adapt and learn in those new environments is in the middle, right? Like oftentimes the people at the far extremes are the people who aren't like the ones that are open to having that conversation and wanting to communicate. They're just saying, I'm this and no one's ever going to change it, and that's all. And so trying to realize like, hey, there is this, like you mentioned, spectrum of ideas and who I am between all of these different things. So I think that's fascinating. I wanted to ask a little bit about your current role within the Center for Family and Community Engagement. I know you've been working with them for a few years. What is, it's just, first of all, what's your favorite or most impactful piece of working within that role and within the center?
Absolutely. So my current position right now is a postdoctoral research scholar. Postdoctoral role is usually a temporary transitional role between when you obtain your Ph.D. and when you enter an academic position or a full-fledged research scholar position or something of that nature. And it's really designed to kind of hone and perfect your skills that you learned in your doctoral program and kind of build your CV in terms of publication and experience. So that's where I am right now in my career. And most of my work within the center focuses on program and process evaluation within the context of child welfare. However, I'm also a lab manager in the Military Wellness Lab, which is directed by Dr. Sam Kakase. And we do some really important and interesting research evaluating service member and veteran well-being. And we have a grand plan, as all researchers do, of redefining how communities perceive this population by dismantling stigma and prejudice around mental health through, of course, data-driven approaches, because that's what we do. And I really enjoy all aspects of research, which again is interesting because I never intended to be doing this at all. Yeah. I actually hated math and hated statistics, but that's what I find myself doing most hours of most days. Dang. And yeah, I find it very rewarding. It's such a push-pull, and it's just imagine every day trying to figure out a 1,000-piece puzzle, and you get those corners super easily, and then you get stuck with one piece that you just can't figure out no matter what you do. And you're just so ready to give up. And then when you find where it goes, you're like, oh my God, this is awesome. I'm so good at this. Let's keep going.
Yeah. Oh my gosh. So within the idea of the military work, like the work within the military and that program that you're working on, I think that within a lot of communities, there is that stigma or prejudice. Like, how can we keep our minds open and our identities open to be able to continue to learn and adapt within these types of situations?
Yeah, absolutely. And one of the things that eventually I really want to do in my career is make research accessible.
Yes.
To the layperson. We spend so much time in our silos and our ivory towers writing for ourselves that regular people can't understand what we're saying, and they can't relate to it at all. Yeah. And in terms of the military stigma and prejudice, and really extending that to all groups of persons, I think exposure is the biggest thing. I preach this all the time, and it's hard for people, but expose yourself to those people. Conversation. Yeah. Read a book. Don't watch a movie. Don't watch a show. Everything is so dramatized. Everything is about PTSD and right. TBI, and yes, those are real and important issues, and they affect so many people. But not every veteran has PTSD right. and is going to flip out or react to a loud noise or do any of the things that we see in movies or on TV. It's just not the case. So unfortunately, things like the media instill this perception in us that one size fits all. Everyone who has seen combat is broken. Right. It's so not the case. So not the case. These are real people, and they struggle with real things outside of what we see on TV. And we need to recognize that. And the best way for your average person to kind of break that stereotype is to go talk to someone. Go get to know a veteran. Right. Have a regular conversation. Don't approach them with fear or apprehension or anything like that. It's they're just a normal person doing normal things, trying to live a normal life.
I love that. And that idea really like applies across so many different things. I think, yes. Like just me, even, as a student, you could give the example of like a professor or something, as just a random example. But, if I think that all professors are these like mean people who don't want to help me, right? Like, which is some people just genuinely believe that. Hey, like if I grab lunch with my professor, like I'm going to realize, that guy really just was a cool person. He's really smart dude and just wants to help me. Right. So just even for little examples like that, hey, if I think my professor just absolutely hates me or like doesn't want that, like, hey, let's just have a conversation. Let's talk about it. And I love that.
Yeah. I mean, I think as a society, it's, we're so entrenched in these really divisive conversations about race and identity and right. politics and things like that. And we put up barriers when we're uncomfortable. And I think we need to start normalizing having hard conversations and being vulnerable and asking questions. It's perfectly fine to ask someone about something that you're unsure about. It's just simply asking someone how they identify.
Yep.
Let's normalize it.
Yeah. I see in what I'm doing with working with college students and high school students, a lot of it is the fear of, hey, how is this other person going to think differently of me if I ask this question that's hard? How can we break through that barrier? Because for me, a lot of times I'm worried about asking the wrong question or wording it the wrong way in a way that would offend someone. Is there a way that I can either overcome that or work through it from my end so that I know that there's not going to be offense taken from the other person?
Absolutely. I think expressing our intentions is really important. Owning our ignorance and owning our curiosity is where we need to start, but also accepting that someone might not want to talk to you. Someone might not want to answer your question, and that is fine. No one owes you anything as a person. No one is responsible for your own education other than you. And that's something I harp on a lot. And so I think coming from those two perspectives is a really important first step, and just embracing that vulnerability. We have such a hard time being vulnerable and being uncomfortable.
Right.
But being uncomfortable should be an indicator for introspection and not a precursor for withdrawal.
You're uncomfortable. So instead of not having the conversation, you look inside to say, why is this making me uncomfortable? For anyone who, like me, had a hard time understanding.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, if you're uncomfortable with something, it's not someone else's fault. Why? Ask yourself, why am I uncomfortable? Is it because I'm uncomfortable with how they're expressing themselves? Is it am I uncomfortable with the social environment? Any number of reasons, but ask yourself why. Because one, other people, whoever you're interacting with, might not know you're uncomfortable. How are you expressing that feeling of uncomfortability? And because a lot of times it could be anger, it could be aggression, it could just be, again, withdrawal, shutting down. I'm going to shut down and move away from the situation, which might eliminate certain experiences or connections that could be made that might benefit you. You don't know. And so I think it's important for us to really look inside ourselves and ask ourselves why we think a certain way or why we behave a certain way. And that can open up a lot of doors. But you have to be okay with sitting with that discontent, that feeling of being uncomfortable. So why don't we ask ourselves, how can I adjust myself to make my interactions more fulfilling or positive for both myself and others? Because conflict goes two ways. 100%. As much as we don't want to think that, because we have a win or lose mentality around conflict. Oh, I won that argument, you lost. But it negatively impacts everyone involved, including yourself. Even if you win, it's still a negative experience.
So good. Yeah, I could not agree more. I have struggled with that. I've admitted this on past episodes that I've struggled with the idea of like winning an argument or like, oh, like I want to be right. Like human nature says like, oh, yep. I'm right. Like I want to be right. And so like being right at the cost of the relationship is not a win, like in anybody's mind. And there's a quote, Dale Carnegie says, he says, a person convinced against his will is of the same opinion still. Like if you convince someone, but if they don't agree with you, like they're still of their same opinion. And so like, I love that quote in this context because we think we're right. We think we're convincing people, but in reality, they still think the same thing. You didn't convince them. They don't care. So I love that.
And that's not to say to concede always.
Right.
That doesn't mean that we need to change ourselves to fit into whatever group we're interacting with or to please whoever we're interacting with. That's not the case. It's just to say that, incorporate some basic human kindness and understanding into your interactions. Not everyone's going to agree with you, and that's okay. It's okay. But learn how to do it constructively.
Yes.
So that we're not hurting everyone around us every time we disagree with them.
And it's that like keeping communication open even when people don't. It is not to say never have the hard conversation. It's just to say have the hard conversation and realize like not everyone's gonna agree all the time.
Absolutely.
One question that I love asking action-based questions because having that piece where people can take this conversation and move on it in some way. I think, with a lot of student leaders listening to the podcast, how can we as students make sure that we are supporting our community in the face of stress, anxiety, the things going on? Any tips for student leaders to be able to support the people around them?
Yeah, and I think we need to take a quick step back and think about how we conceptualize stress. I think it's really important that we conceptualize stress within a developmental framework. Of course, shocker, the developmentalist says that. So basically, we need to break down people's life experiences and understand them as more than just what we're seeing in the moment, right? So we experience stress and stressful events and experiences across our entire life. And if you're seeing someone at a certain point in their life, we tend to disregard everything that has happened before and take everything at face value, right? And there's some really important research that, of course, suggests we shouldn't do that. And Perlin is a researcher that has published quite a bit on this idea of stress proliferation, the stress proliferation framework, which basically says that stressors lead or contribute to the experience of more stressors down the road. And taking a more global perspective, we also have this idea that there are environments or social systems that perpetuate a chronic experience of stress, such as poverty or racism.
Sure.
Now, that's a little bit different. But these stressors have this cumulative effect on what's called the allostatic load, which is basically the burden that's placed on an organism, an individual, and its biological functions in response to this hardship or stress. So given these two perspectives, everyone operates within a norm of stressor exposure. Again, that nice little range, that spectrum that we like to talk about. So in this kind of emerging adulthood realm that is, still a little bit under debate within the psychological community, but I fully embrace it. This nice little like 18 to 22 range, and we can extend that a little bit into, seniors in high school. But there's a lot of stress that they're experiencing. I mean, they're barely out of adolescence and our brains aren't fully developed and we're just trying to navigate the world. And social stressors are so prevalent. I'm sure we can all look back at that point in our lives and just be freaked out at the amount of social situations that made us so uncomfortable in trying to navigate those. And I think we just need to know that everyone manages stress differently, and there's no one size fits all model. And so as leaders within our community, we need to set an example for balance. I think young people at this point in their lives, they're looking around at other people to figure out what the heck they should do. How is this person managing their stress? Or how is that professor, how did they do it? Because social comparison is a huge indicator at this point in our lives for how we should behave or how we should act.
Yeah.
And so if we as leaders are setting an example for balance, work-life balance, for communicating our needs, our mental and emotional needs, and really showing young people how to navigate life, I think that's one of the biggest things, is just leading by example and not hiding the hard times, not hiding the struggle, to a certain degree. Obviously, we don't want to bear all to everyone.
Yeah.
Personal life is still personal life, but
Right.
Communicate.
Yes.
Be like, I'm struggling with this, or I had a hard time with this, and this is how I handled it, or I went through this when I was your age, and this is how I handled it, given that might not be the best way for you to handle it, but this is the experience from which I'm speaking. And just be there. Communication. If you consistently inquire about someone's mental health, how they're doing, things like that, even if they don't respond, even if they just say fine every day, at one point they're not going to be fine, but they're going to remember that every day or every week when they saw you asked how they were doing. So you've effectively established a foundation for support that when they need that support, they'll remember it. Right. So those are some basic things that I think leadership within communities can really do to help support young people who are going through this obviously stressful time of transition.
Yeah, there was a guy who came to me. He's a freshman in college. He came to me the other day. We were on a Zoom call, and I was asking him, "Hey, what does your time look like? Where are you spending your time?" Because he's talking about, "Oh, I don't feel very productive, XYZ." And we start looking at his time, and he had gotten on a call like 1 or 2 weeks back with someone who was encouraging him, like, here's how you can be more productive. Like, you're cutting out social media. So he's doing this. You can, spend X, Y, and Z. And so he's trying to spend like 14, 16 hours a day, like doing between school, because he's in a double degree, and his work. And, so my first question to him is like, yo, are you taking care of your health? Like, are you exercising? Are you spending any time with your friends, like girlfriend, family, anything? He's like, no, like, I don't exercise. I don't have time for it. And I don't spend any time socializing. And I was like, dang, like, that's pretty tough. Like, and so, we talk about social comparison, and my biggest encouragement for young people is it's easy to get fixed on one person and learn from that one person and do the way they do. And that's what he was doing with this guy who's like, you cut out social media, you cut out, XYZ. And I'm like, dude, like, do you want to have friends? Like, do you want to spend time with people? I'm like, what do you want? He's like, oh shoot, like, yeah, like that, it would be great to be in good shape. It would be great to have a social life and physical health. And so that's my biggest encouragement, is like, don't get so fixed on one person who does it their way that works for them, that you don't open yourself up to more perspectives. Because I think that was, we have that conversation. He's like, dude, I'm going to do things differently. Right. And so it's so important.
You hit on a really great point there. And what you're, in terms of a more scientific approach, or at least like theoretically within the psychological community, we reference that as Maslow's hierarchy of needs.
Yes.
If your basic needs aren't met, then you don't have the resources to put towards more complex needs. And within the context of a college environment, and these kids, being under high cognitive demand in terms of course load and social stress, you can't expect them to have extra resources to put towards those things if they're not meeting their basic needs. Eating healthy, getting sleep, getting exercise, fulfilling emotional and social needs. Like, we have to foster this idea of holistic health in order to be able to have the energy and resources to pursue more demanding goals like higher ed.
Exactly.
And it's very fundamental in terms of the science, but we we don't apply it. We don't check in on it. And it's to a certain degree, you have to be responsible for meeting those needs yourself. But as leadership, we can't demand certain things if we're not educating young people that it's important that they fulfill these basic needs to be able to excel in these higher demand tasks. And again, you need to take a life course perspective on stress. Has someone lived their life such that they have never had the time or resources to actually make sure that those needs are met? Are you living in systemic poverty, or are you constantly exposed to environments where racism is rampant, that you haven't been able to take care of your mental health in however long, you're not financially stable, things like that. Right. We need to take those things into consideration when we are asking young people, how are you doing?
If people like this conversation and they want to see more from you or have questions for you, where can they go? And then any resources that you'd recommend for people to check out?
Absolutely. So the work that we do, we're actually revamping our website in the military wellbeing lab. So that will eventually be linked to the CFACE website, but the Center for Family Community Engagement has its own website, cface.org, CFACE.org. Very simple. I do have a profile on there. Also, my LinkedIn profile. That's a great way if you have any questions to get in contact with me. Happy to answer any messages or talk to anyone who wants to contact me through there. And then Tiny Leaps, Big Changes with Greg Clunas. And this is about personal development and daily behaviors that determine results, both positive and negative. So things that you can do at the micro level, little habits and things that you can incorporate into your daily life that are going to lead to bigger changes and opening doors and, using your time productively and being organized, things like that. It's great.
Fantastic. Well, and all of those sound like I'll have to check them out, but all of them sound like they're very in line with both our conversation and what the target audience is needing right now. So thank you so much for sharing those. Would definitely encourage anybody who has questions or wants more information. Emily has been a fantastic resource for me as I'm learning and excited to continue that conversation after this. So thank you everybody for listening and tuning in today. I hope you enjoyed today's conversation, and we'll see you again next week.
Thank you so much, Parker.
Thanks for listening to the Taking a Breath podcast with Parker Mays.